Wildlife Sanctuary Manager at McNeil, and I've been able to be out there for over a decade now, so I've been a pretty lucky person. And it's been a fantastic place to spend summers, let me tell you. We got a couple of photographs here. You see McNeil River Falls in the upper left-hand corner, and you see McFick Creek in the lower right-hand corner. And our season is divided up into different areas. We spend our June month, the month of June in McFick, and most of the month of July we're at McNeil Falls. And in August we're in the falls and we move around a bit. We go to the mouth of the river quite a bit. So there's a couple different areas we move around. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But in the lower right-hand corner you see the tent sites where the folks tent and camp. And those of you who have been there before are probably familiar with that cook shack on the left where you store all your food. And there's a nice view of McFick Flats with a bear looking right over the shoulder of those bear viewers there, looking at bears behind the group. So that the group is not of interest, it's the bears that behind the group. The visitor program is by permit only, and of course you have to play a lottery to win a permit. We usually see about 700 to 1,000 applicants that are in a lottery for about 257 permits. About 15 of those go into science and education, and about 185 in the regular permit structure, and then about 57 standbys. It's weighted toward Alaskans. About 2/3 of the permits go to Alaskans, about 1/3 to non-Alaskans. Here's a picture of camp. That's our footprint right there. And on the far right, you see the cook shack. And as you move to the left, you'll see the crew quarters, or research quarters, and then where the staff quarters over to the left there. There's a couple outhouses in the back. And that's right there on the beach, right out in front of McNeil Cove. And a little picture of the falls up top with a group with a bunch of bears fixing, so you get a little view of that pad out in McNeil where we've been viewing bears since around 1970 and even before that. So we do collect data out there. We do fish, we actually do bear counts, and we keep track of the total number of bears that we see. So in a sense, here's our total number of individual bears we were able to tally last year, about 104 bears. These are bears that we were able to ID and kind of follow day in, day out. Of course, there's additional bears that are hard to ID due to the lack of distinguishing characteristics. And we usually go ahead and just put this in a graph, and you can kind of see these are bears that we've been keeping track of relative to IDs. And we think we saw 104 last year. And then we also have another thing we call the bear threshold criterion, and it's based on taking the 7 highest counts and the 7 highest days at the McNeil Falls. And you can kind of see in 2011 we were back up there to about 60 as a mean, which is a real high number. And we had gone way down around 2005. You can kind of see. And then these things kind of are not static. They tend to move around a bit. Now, most people get to the falls via float planes from Homer, and a number of outfitters do come from Homer, a couple from Kodiak, some from King Salmon, and occasionally from Anchorage, but that's a lengthy flight. But it's about a 1-hour float plane flight at the high tide from Homer over to McNeil. And folks show up there at the spit, and we meet them at the spit with our wheelbarrows. We bring everything back into camp and set up those tents, and everyone gets an orientation. And all the food is kept inside the cook shack, so we have no food in those tents. So the real key to the success of this viewing program is that we don't have food-conditioned bears, very simply. And that's part of the magic that makes it work so well. Now, this is the cook shack, where we meet every morning. We come down and chat with the folks, and they have their breakfast inside, and we'll kind of touch base with them, talk about the daily schedule, talk about the tides, and set our plan for the day. And folks are getting their cameras ready. Of course, this is a film camera. These days, everybody's shooting digital, so we don't see so much film anymore, and not so much f-stop conversation pertaining to what the f-stop or the shutter speed is. Because these days everybody just brackets, kind of rapid fire. It's a little different. Every day before you go out to the falls, you get a daily briefing. You can see Drew here to the left. He is briefing the group. And on the right, in that green shirt with the tan vest, is Larry Allmiller, our 30-year sanctuary manager, who is emeritus these days, and still graces us with his presence in terms of covering for staff breaks, which is a great benefit, along with John Hechtel, who's present here tonight. And so we've been lucky to have retired staff come out and help us out. Now, we do keep track of the flora and fauna out there. We do try to make note of anything we see. First blooms. This is a Kamchatka rhododendron. And so we will stop and talk about things besides bears and flora, fauna, anything we see out there that we want to bring to the attention of the group. And of course, lots of tracks out there in the mud. Sometimes folks bring a little plaster and make some plaster cast out there, which is a popular pastime to bring home a little memento. Of course, you have to have a good dry track to get a nice track to take home. We do see other species out there. This little tree swallow, a little fledger, and you'll see a little more of that later. But we make note of the first birds we see each season as well, and keep track of our daily wildlife observations. We do see a number of bald eagles, and boy, around late June, early July, there's quite a few out there. Last year, at one point, we could count over 100 bald eagles from camp on the observatory. So you see quite a few of them out there. They're pretty easy to spot. Those whiteheads, at least adults, are easy to spot, and even the sub-adults. So with a good set of binoculars, you can count some eagles from camp. But of course, eventually they'll kind of move out when that fish run starts to wane. Now here's the group getting ready. Now this is a little bit of an old school group here. You can kind of see there's no Gore-Tex in this group. But they're getting ready to go out. They've got their tripods and they've got their food for the day and all their layers, their hip boots on. They've had their briefing and they're ready to go bear viewing. So they're going to follow the group leader out for a day of bear viewing. Mostly we're going to see Ursus arctos, which is the center stage. We do see other species, we see other species of wildlife, and you're going to be in for a little surprise a little later. I don't want to give it away just yet. We had some really incredible wildlife sightings outside of the Ursus species. So here's the McNeil Flats, where we spend most of June out there watching bears grazing sedge and fishing for salmon up and down McNeil Creek. And you can kind of see that rich sedge flat out there that's mostly Carex lingbii, and that can be up to 20% protein when it's just about, yay high, about that high right there, just not very high. When it gets really tall, it's really fibrous and not quite as valuable. And of course, we'll just kind of set up out there and put some time in and keep our movements to a minimum. And bears, very simply, will come out and graze in and around the area we're in. And this makes for a great photographic pastime. And you can kind of see these folks set up out here with their tripod in the mud. And this is just out there in McNeil Flats. And of course, those bears really spend a lot of time grinding up those sedge grasses. Now, the following behavior is another feature in the June season, sometimes even into July, with males following females who are in estrus or who are even not in estrus. At least they're hoping they might smell some pheromone here and there. And this is the riffles, where a lot of activity happens, where as fish kind of run up toward McNeil Lake to spawn. The riffles is kind of shallow, and it's kind of a difficult place to get up through this particular, based on how high the water is, to get through these bears in the riffles and up to the upper and lower falls. But it's about a 2-mile journey for these fish from the lagoon up to McNeil Lake. And these are red salmon that run in June. Here's the upper falls in McNeil, and we might move up there. It's about a mile from the previous shot. And it's kind of a narrow canyon. You can kind of see folks are looking down on bears quite a bit. There's a little falls below where bears can catch salmon at the falls. And adult females are, generally pretty clean, not very scarred up like the big males that you're going to see here throughout the slideshow. Quite a bit smaller due to that sexual dimorphosis. A good-sized female is like 400 pounds. So sometimes they can be quite a bit heavier, but they can also be a bit smaller. than 400. But we see some nice looking animals come in, especially in June when things are really start hopping on the flats. Some adults are kind of making their way around as well, 3.5, 4.5-year-old bears. And they're a little bit more weary, sometimes depending on which adults are around or present. And they might get pushed around a little bit more, kicked around than some of the big adults. Now, the big guys, some of them are really big, 800 to 1,200 pounds, and a few of them, probably a handful, are in excess of 1,200 pounds. But those big males have really big heads and huge necks. It's very difficult to keep a collar on an adult male because their necks are so large, and they can just kind of pull those collars right off. Not that we collar bears in McNeil currently. We don't have any projects going on collaring animals, but for folks who do collar bears, it's tough to keep a collar on a big male. Now, females with cubs come out every spring, and those newborn cubs, those spring cubs, are often called coys, or C-O-Y, Cub of the Year. And those are the ones that are about 6 months old, say July and August, born the previous January. And they're out there as well. And of course, the second summer cubs are yearlings, and then 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds, and so on and so forth. But we make a little noise here and there as we're going through. We really exercise a lot of bear safety, and we're very bear aware. We teach bear safety to the group constantly. It's a really good example of how to learn how to be safe around bears, making noise, traveling in groups every day. And of course, the big guns come out a lot for McFick and McNeil Falls. You can see it's kind of a fashion statement here. We've got kind of a mask chain hat with the tripod body there. But folks are getting ready to get those great photographs at McNeil Falls. They line up on that top pad there, and there's an upper pad and a lower pad. And that's mostly starting early July. Even late June sometimes. We'll make a few trips to the falls, and we'll carry on through into early August. We'll start to spend time at the mouth of the river as well. And here's just a picture from the pad at McNeil Falls, and you can see all those gulls out there. They're part of the picture. And they're trying to get all those eggs and all that other stuff that's out there as well. Some folks maybe think that those gulls should not be in their photographs, but those gulls, they're part of the picture as well. So we see all these bears out there congregating, all fishing for salmon. A bit of combat fishing going on. This is not a cooperative fishing effort. They're all competing, and sometimes that's to their advantage, and sometimes it's not. But it makes for a really interesting wildlife observation just to see all those bears fishing out there. Here's the pad out here. You can see us at the top pad with the chairs out there. We spend a long day out there, about 8 hours. So we do have some chairs to sit in that we provide out at the pad. And you can get an idea of the proximity of some of the bears that do travel kind of around us. And even the main focus is not always at McNeil Falls out in front of you. Sometimes it's behind you or on the side. So folks are photographing in all directions, because some bears drag salmon up into the tussocks and eat them nearby, and some bears just take a nap in those tussocks. So there's a lot going on by that pad at all times. Now you can see the fish fever catches when there's a lot of fish out there. Bears don't have to work too hard like they do in the shoulder seasons, like as the fish start to build or as the fish start to wane. And there's a number of fishing strategies. I'm going to point out a few here. Some of them just kind of use that hull displacement, that awesome power and weight, and they just slam the water. And that just seems to stun the fish. They might not even see a salmon. It doesn't appear as though they do. And they might just get up and slam their body, and that may just stun a fish just enough to pin it with their pads or catch it in the mouth, mostly pin them with their claws. And some bears snorkel for 5, 10, 15, even 20 to 30 seconds sometimes. They'll go down under the water and look around, look for fish, and they'll kind of herd them around a little bit. So some of the snorkelers and plungers and divers are very successful. Now, there's aggression from time to time over maybe hierarchy in the overall rank of bears, or the resource, or who has a salmon versus who doesn't. And most of the time, about 90% of the time, there's no contact. It's just posturing, jaw sparring, stuff like that. And then occasionally there's contact. But there's a lot of risk when there's contact. These animals can do a lot of harm to one another. So they have to pick and choose their battles carefully. You kind of see those canines there showing each other with a great vocalization from time to time as well. A little bit of salmon blood on that bear's muzzle. And usually bears that are like-sized really kind of have a real challenge. But if there's an easy, I should say a wider dispersal in size, like say a small bear versus a large bear, you know, oftentimes a large bear just has to posture, and a smaller bear is going to take a submissive stance. Now here's a bear with very white claws, and he's working some skin and some roe and in the brains, the fattiest parts of the fish. So they start to hybrid if they start catching a lot of fish consecutively. And people look at a carcass like that and they think for a second that there's actually waste. But let me tell you, there's no waste. Because when this bear leaves this pile, there's a subadult right there ready to go to come down and get a scrap, or an eagle or a fox. Or even if this carcass gets dragged off the stream and breaks down, it adds a lot of nitrogen into the soil. And even in southeast Alaska, they've been able to, you know, look at the isotopes in some of those big oak trees and trace them to red salmon or silver salmon to a specific nearby run. So all those carcasses are really valuable. Even if they end up at the bottom of the river, there's seals at the mouth of the river waiting for those carcasses. Now, some of the different strategies you're going to see a little further along. This particular bear has got a great strategy. He's a very large male. I would estimate that he's probably 1,100 or 1,200 plus pounds, maybe bigger. He very simply sits in one spot facing downriver, and the water goes over his back, and he becomes a geological part of the earth. And so, in a sense, the fish swim right up to him like as though he's conglomerate. And they just kind of sit in the eddy in front of him, and he reaches down and gets one. And then he turns around and pins it to the rock behind him, pulls the skin off, the roe, the brains, what have you, and goes back to his spot, sits down and waits for more fish to swim up to him. So you can kind of see there's a lot of creative styles out there. And when they do bring fish to the shoreline and pin them to the conglomerate to pull off that skin, they're often shake a lot of that water off. So there's a lot of water flying in the air a lot of times when they walk by. Now, some of these females that are not quite as big, not near as big as some of these males, they might be less than half the size, they actually can get as much fish as some of those big guys based on their creativity and the way they know how to work in and out of a particular group of bears. And we actually had Ian Gill out there, and he was doing some monitoring bouts on some of the females and the different age class bears, males, and he found that some of the females did really well. So it's not a real simple matter of the biggest bear gets the most fish. It's a little bit more complex than that. Now, when they do satiate themselves, they just crash. And again, some of these big bears, like this big male right here we've been watching for about the last 10 seasons or so, he doesn't need to go far from the falls. He'll stay right there in the middle of the falls and kind of crash on into some conglomerate. Now, I can recognize him. I can notice that he's missing a claw in his front right paw. And we look for these distinguishing characteristics day in, day out. And we try to track the individual bears every day. So people get fish fever too. People come out and maybe catch a salmon and eat it back at the cook shack. We only catch what we can eat in a given day, so we don't try to catch our limit. Just catch what we can bring back to the cook shack and bake up and share with the group. So fishing is quite popular. All of us like to fish, and we eat fish as well, but we fish out at the end of the spit. We don't fish up on the river. So if you do come out to McNeil River and you want to do a little sport fishing, we just have a selected area we do it in, and it's popular, so that's another thing we can do. We just have to be careful when we're out there fishing. And we've never had a bear get a fish from us because we're very careful, keeping an eye out. Obviously, if a bear comes within about 150, 200 yards of it, we just reel it in and kind of move to the top of the spit and let that bear move right on by us. And then we'll go back to fishing when the bear is at a safe distance. So again, good to the last bite. You can see this tail in this bear's mouth, a little saliva. And you know, they're really dexterous. They can hang on to those fish. Those fish are really powerful. When they catch them, they like to slip away. out of the stronghold of the bear, but sometimes they do slip away. But the bears really have a good, an amazing ability with their dexterity. Here's a big male that's kind of frothy, and if we see a bear that's a little frothy, we're kind of paying attention to that bear just to see what he might be upset about. But that's usually to do with another bear that's in the area. Another large bear might come in, and it becomes pretty apparent when something's going on. We can just watch a bear's behavior, and the bears will let us know before another bear comes in a lot of times. You know, you see a bear looking toward the alders and looking and looking and looking, and you're not seeing anything and you're not smelling anything. And then lo and behold, a few minutes later, maybe 5 or 10 minutes later, a bear might enter the stage from that direction. Now, play bouts are pretty common with the bears that are fairly satiated. They've had a lot to eat, and so they might get bipedal and have a play bout. And sometimes when I watch some of the television specials, sometimes when I see this activity, I notice they dub a very ferocious kind of growling sound on top of this, but that tends to be Hollywood for you. Certainly bears do get into it sometimes, but a lot of times they're just playing. And two males play quite often, and they jaw spar, and they get bipedal, mostly after they've had a lot of salmon to eat, and they're certainly feeling fairly satiated. And it's as though two certain bears that have a rapport will clue into each other. So it's not entirely random. You see bears seek each other out and play consistently, two bears that are comfortable with each other.